Welcome to Land Language, the podcast transforming landscapes from toxic to regenerative. We're your host, Brit from Blueprint Earth,
and co-host Bethany from Bethany Rydmark Landscapes.
We explore beautiful, functional design through conversations with scientists, vendors, contractors, and designers who are changing the industry.
Whether you're in the field or at the drafting table, join us as we explore regenerative practices that care for people, place, and planet.
Let's dig in. So today, we have the great pleasure of having Paul Bonine in studio with us. He is one of the owners at Xera Plants, which if you are savvy in the Portland landscape industry, you know so much about this nursery. He is also author of multiple books and has a degree in paleoclimatology, I see. So he has a degree in paleoclimatology. Paul is coming to us because we have so many questions around best practices in the landscape, best practices around soil building, best practices around invasive and weed management. And as we're progressing through climate, just starting to really think about the analogy of how to bring some of these best practices into a more sustainable future to eliminate some of the high carbon production that we do in the landscape, specifically in landscape construction. There's so much to say on that.
We're so excited you're here, Paul. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. It's very nice. Thanks.
So, Paul, when we got to chat before this interview started, we got to chat a little bit about some of the basic things in terms of using plants as a green mulch and the impact that starts to layer into how you manage a landscape and produce it in construction.
Well, a lot of people who start a landscape, it's predicated on there are a lot of problems they have to solve. And one of the problems is weeds. And weeds are one of the main components of things that cause us to use a lot of carbon and a lot of chemicals. And we don't need to use those. There are more manageable mechanical ways of managing weeds. And you can use other weeds to manage weeds. You can choose your weeds. And you can choose native annuals, which are great weeds. And they're the most endangered class of plants in Oregon, hardy native annuals. And so I use them. Meadowfoam, which is used as a culinary thing, but it's also used as a source for honey for specific bees, and they make really good meadowfoam honey. And that's how I was familiar with it in the Southern Willamette Valley, but it's also grew in seeps around where I lived. And if you take meadowfoam and you put it down in August, the seeds, it germinates before the first rains, and it blocks out grasses and weeds. And so what happens is you use one weed. Send a thief to catch a thief. You send one weed to kill another weed, and this weed is from here as opposed to all the Eurasian stuff that came. We disturbed the soil and brought turf grasses and things like that.
I thought one of the really interesting things that you suggested was using meadowfoam to get rid of turf grass and how there's no running native grass in Oregon.
There are no running or stoloniferous grasses in Oregon. They're all bunch grasses or clumping grasses. Most of them are fescues. And the Willamette Valley was all clumping grasses before Europeans got here. When Europeans came, they brought Eurasian grasses, which are running and stoloniferous, to make lawns for commercial uses, for fields and everything, for even orchard grass. And that usurped the native bunch grasses because it just took them over. And what that did was destroy a lot of native habitat for wildflower seeds because the bunch grasses allowed annuals, perennials, and bulbs to grow in between them. And the running grasses don't. They just run right over our wildflowers, and they destroyed a lot of wildflower habitat just with bunch grasses. So if you take that lesson, you think you do the reverse, you find something that's even more vigorous than the grass, and you stick it on that, and you can achieve a balance or a control where you stop winter weeds from happening with your own weeds, and you can use this like a mechanical way rather than spraying the weeds or having to think about it all winter long. The meadowfoam just grows. It germinates in October. It gets wider and wider and slowly grows over the grass seed, over the weed seeds, which are germinating, and it takes over and becomes a solid monocrop kind of thing. It also blocks out grass, but it blocks out other weeds too, and weeds seem to blow by it too, which is nice. They don't seem to sit in it because it's growing so fast all the time. It's been very useful, and I use it in my flower beds, and I've had it for 15 years now, the same flower beds.
How long have you been doing this practice?
Yeah, 15 years maybe. I just shake the seeds and push the chaff to the side, plant what I want to plant, because there are no weeds. It gets rid of everything, and it also gets rid of the excess moisture in the ground with the root systems, so the soil becomes very friable and easy to use.
Are you buying that Meadowfoam seed every year as a cover crop?
Not anymore. I bought it 15 years ago. At Xera, we sell the actual starts. And what we found is if you put one 4-inch Meadowfoam plant in, I'm sure you've done this, you end up the next year with about 500. It's just what it does.
And now you have your own seed stock.
Yeah, you have your own seed stock. Friends of ours who trade it, you take the chaff after it's done blooming. It's got yellow flowers with white edges on the tips. It's very pretty when it blooms. It smells very good too. But it grows so fast, it just outcompetes everything else. And it happens to be very drought tolerant, which is really good too. Because even though it grows in seeps in the wild, it can grow in incredibly drought tolerant, packed, hard clay if you sow it.
It'll
in the
germinate
fall.
into that.
It'll germinate into
compacted
the
soil?
most compacted hard clay, and it'll sink its roots down it and break up the clay. But it's a very useful plant, and you can use cover crops. I use lots and lots of native hardy annuals because they attract certain pollinators, specific pollinators. For instance, Achillea capitata, which is a blue thimbleflower, I think it's called. I'm bad at common
Yeah,
names.
it's like I know it's Latin name, but not its common.
Blue thimbleflower or blue fields, and it was found by OSU to be the #1 nectar source for all native pollinators.
Interesting.
Yeah, so I
Also,
use a
deer
lot.
love it.
And deer love it, yeah.
So if you have a garden that has a lot of deer,
It'll
They'll eat
attract
it.
them.
They'll eat it. And deer will eat a lot of native plants just because they're
That
native.
was their salad bar.
That is their salad bar. Just because it's native doesn't mean they're not going to munch it down. That's what they live on.
when we get to go buy lawn from some of the large lawn producers, we can purchase a fescue. Is that still different than?
Yeah, that's Lolium peren, most likely, or a version of creeping bent ryegrass. And bent ryegrass was from Europe, and it's the #1 lawn grass of the country besides the much more water-intensive Kentucky bluegrass. So people went to bent grasses because they are more drought tolerant and they cover areas faster. Now, the interesting thing about bent grass is that Oregon is the only place in the world now because Monsanto was trying to breed herbicide-tolerant grass in Deschutes County is where they were doing it. And unfortunately, that bent grass got loose and now is loose in Deschutes, I think Crook and up by Madras. I don't know which county that is, but that whole area now is blocked off because it has bent grass that's now
Naturalized.
naturalized and it's resistant to herbicide. So there's a whole bunch of problems that come with bent grass. And
And is that different than what we can buy as fescue when we go? Because we kind of get those two options. No. Okay. Neither one.
what you call as fescue for a lawn is actually Lolium peren.
Okay.
It's not a festuca.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, they're different species. They're closely related, but they're different.
Interesting what marketing will do.
And there's also orchard grass, which is a different thing. And there's several different kinds of lawn grasses that they usually add bluegrass in if there's shade, if it's a shade mix. Because bluegrass will take more shade, but not really.
A lot of the practice that I know that we're in, and I think that you're in too, is we end up getting rid of a lot of the grasses. So some of the practices that we've read about is yellow rattleseed, which is typical in the UK. And then now there's Meadowfoam, which is new to me, which is very exciting. I'm hearing you say that it will start to outcompete lawn.
Yeah, it'll outcompete lawn. In fact, I use it in my garden. I use it as an abutment to my neighbor's lawn in the hill strip. The Meadowfoam goes just right up to their lawn and stops the lawn grass from coming into my bed.
That's really useful information.
Yeah, it's a very useful plant. I'm surprised people haven't used it
Yeah,
before.
I'm just curious because I've never used it. So where do you source? You don't do it anymore, but
Northwest,
now.
we sell the plants in Northwest Meadowscapes is a
Oh, yeah,
place.
yeah.
I've gotten it from Climacyscue seed. It's very good. Willamette Wildings, I think, might have it. But those places seem to have fresh seed, which is important. A lot of those wildflower seeds can sit around for years, and that's not good.
Okay, so that's how we deal with outcompeting weeds. We get to dry up the soils so that we can work the soils after they're done.
Makes
We
it
can-
friable and crumbly.
You were also saying earlier before we were recording about drawing the moisture out of the soil to make it more workable at the beginning of the growing season.
Yeah, and then people have used cover crops in Oregon for a long time to do that, like Austrian field peas or limnanthes, which is Meadowfoam, or you use those as cover crops to pull the water out of the soil early on in the spring, and then you can take the cover crop and put it aside. That's basically all nitrogen because it's green. You take the nitrogen there, and then the roots have gone down. Rye grain, which you can use, that's what I was trying to think of earlier. Annual rye grain goes down 3 feet in its roots and breaks up the subsoil. And so when you take it off the top, you're left with all this organic matter that's dead below that you've just infused into the ground. It's very useful. It's better than trying to double dig compost, which is a pain.
I'm going to ask you a question that we didn't get to talk about earlier, just out of curiosity. So right now there's some movements towards microforest, and then there's movements towards prairies or perennial gardens with grasses as being carbon sequestering environments and starting to learn that prairies sequester more carbon.
Prairies sequester an amazing amount of carbon, but you have to look at the soil horizon when you look at prairie grasses because they go down very far. In fact, we sell a grass that I have to give a warning to. It's Mollinia caerulea variegata. It's a variegated switchgrass, and it goes down 2 or 3 feet. And once you have it, you kind of have it. It's really hard to get rid of. You have to get a ditching shovel and go way down. So this sequesters all the carbon down below the surface of the soil, which is kind of cool. On top too, but mostly at the surface.
So how do you think about those two ideals and contrast? Is there really a contrast there or just different applications?
There are different applications. For instance, the Austrian field peas and the rye grain that pulls the moisture out, most people use those in raised beds. Like when I worked at Nursery in Eugene, people are very into cover cropping in Eugene. This is a little more hippie-like, and they're more into open ideas. And we sold Austrian field peas, annual rye grain, buckwheat, crimson clover, and I think 1 or 2 other things that were cover crops. And the more lush ones of the vegetable gardeners used to use Austrian field peas because it sucks an enormous amount of water out of the soil. And then the soil's loose and friable and they take it away. And then you can put the rest of the cover crop on your compost pile. And that's just nitrogen that'll help it break down.
And in agriculture, that seems so important because part of the hardship is being able to dry out your fields.
Yes, it's a very hard problem. In fact, when I worked at Blooming Nursery, which is a big, huge wholesale nursery, and I was the field manager, and I managed their fields with 13 acres of perennials. And it was a lot. And most of it was underwater. And we started using cover crops to suck the water out of the ground because you couldn't even drive the 4-wheel thing there. It wouldn't work because it was so muddy. So we used cover crops and just started throwing seed around and sucking the water out of the ground. And it helped. It helped a lot.
It makes me think growing up on a farm, my family's farm would plant red clover in enormous fields. And there's that moment at the beginning of the growing season where that's not even the crop that they're all about, but there's that payoff of these incredible waves of beautiful red all across wide open Willamette Valley fields. It's pretty fun.
Clover is an interesting thing. Clover you have to be very careful with because there are annual clovers and there are perennial clovers. And sometimes I'll see people use Dutch white clover, which is a perennial which lives forever, as a cover crop and you're stuck with it forever. An annual cover crop is one that completes its life cycle in 1 year and sets seed and dies, not a perennial that goes on and on. So you have to be very careful when you get to clover to make sure you get annual clover seeds. And there are some native clovers that work really well for that too. One is called ciliolata, and another one is called wildenovii. That's tomcat clover. And they all fix nitrogen because they're legumes, and they are naturally what fixed disturbed soils before humans got here were clovers and annuals.
Not to be too punny about going back to the roots here, but can I ask you some questions about, goodness, you've been making this your life for so long. What got you interested in green and growing things and understanding plant biology and soil biology?
I was a little kid. I lived in the country and I was a little kid and I studied since I was a child. I was a gardener. So I've just done it my whole life. And I did it. And in college, I was going to do journalism after college and then I didn't like that as much. And so I just got a degree in geography. And then I was already working in a nursery, managing one in college.
Did you grow up here in the Northwest?
I grew up in Eugene mostly.
Okay.
Eugene, Southern California. And I managed a down-to-earth wholesale nursery or retail nursery in Eugene, which is downtown. It's a nice store.
And then you went to University of Oregon.
I went to the U of O, yeah. I was going to the U of O when I managed the nursery.
Excellent.
And that was fun.
I remember you telling me some stories about the soil that you grew up on just being hard as concrete.
Concrete clay. It goes dormant and it turns into concrete. You can knock on it. It's the kind of soil that if it's slightly wet, you can make an ashtray out of it and bake it.
Wow.
It's so bad. And what's funny about that is the majority of plants that were in that were hardy native annuals.
It's because they were going and breaking it up.
Yeah. Because they can deal with the super heavy clay. Also a lot of other wildflowers too that people everyone wants to amend the soil for everything here, and I don't know why.
Yeah, tell us about that.
I don't know why that is, because organic matter just goes away in the soil here. It just breaks down really fast. So it's a brief benefit. And mulch is really important. I would always mulch, but actually digging material into the ground seems superfluous and not useful.
Interesting, because in my thought, which I'm hearing is maybe what you're told and not really what you need to know, is that when we do a landscape and we put 2 to 3 inches of compost on top of a naked soil because we've just excavated it away, that is a food bank for some years to come and starting to reset it.
Okay, the difference is between digging it in and putting it on top of the surface. On top of the surface, it does great things. It adds humic acid, it draws microorganisms up from the subsurface, and it keeps the soil moist. Because what happens in the Willamette Valley is our soils go dormant in the dry season. There's no biological activity in the soil. You've seen it when you dig out. We try to water here in the summertime and it beads up and rolls away because it becomes hydrophobic. That's our soil. So adding compost to the surface is great because it'll totally break down and add the humic acid and go down. Adding it down below is just superfluous. I don't think it really does a whole lot.
Because it just washes deeper.
It just goes away. It just breaks down very fast.
That's good to know because we do have clients from time to time that are like, I want you to go and till my whole yard because that's what my granddad did.
Tilling is a different thing entirely, and it adds a whole different element. And people think it's necessary, and I just don't think it's necessary at all.
You like to work with these hardy annuals to start to produce soil ecology and bring soil ecology up.
Yeah.
I'm imagining a construction site. So it's a new build or it's a remodel and there's been a lot of heavy equipment. And so we're dealing with kind of an extreme version of a compacted soil. It might be native soil, which should be
I've done
fun.
that before. I've done that exact same thing when they raped it up to the sea horizon. And there was no organic matter. It was clay and it was gray rocky sediment from the coast range. And it was horrible. It was dug out. And the only thing we could do was put down crimson clover for 2 years.
Well, I was going to ask, I was like, is this the meadowfoam? Is this the clover?
The crimson clover did the best job of fixing nitrogen in the soil. Because you can also inoculate it with an inoculate. If the crimson clover fixes nitrogen in the soil, also breaks up the subsoil. And so you're getting two things at once. Organic matter is being added, and you're adding nitrogen to this, a nitrogen fixer. So that gets rid of like sea horizons and starts breaking down and making real soil, like topsoil as opposed to the sea horizon.
I have another question here, and this is the conundrum. When you're working with clients and expectations of timeline, I can imagine a scenario is there's a house under construction right now. They're going to be finishing up. We're going to be coming up into the end of summer, the beginning of autumn. Great, it's construction time. Let's build a garden and let's get ready and put plants in the ground. But almost what I hear is an ideal world. You would be planting cover crops this fall. You wouldn't even be touching those beds. You could build your hardscapes, but you wouldn't be bringing plant material in until those cover crops have had an entire growing cycle.
Added organic matter and nitrogen.
Which
to
changes
the soil.
the dynamic of a contractor-client relationship
It takes-
dramatically. So is my role as designer introducing these notions to people at the beginning is to say, hey, maybe construction timelines, in order to achieve healthier outcomes, construction timelines actually need to be extended. And maybe we have chapter 1 and chapter 2.
Or symbiotic at the same time. You could do things too. I see a lot of construction sites where they could just throw some grass, some seed down of some type, and they would eliminate a whole bunch of mud and nasty problems
Just
too.
even during maybe some of that construction time, once we're not...
buckwheat. You could throw
Yeah.
buckwheat seed down,
Yeah.
and it's not hardy to cold, but it'll be during the summertime, and it'll
Loosen things
up and make things keep going, and add insects and things. It's not such as a sterile zone. A lot of those places can become sterile zones. And then remember too, whenever you do construction, the first thing you do is take away at least half the diversity. Exactly half the diversity is gone. No matter what you try to replace that with, you're never going to have the same diversity as you had when you began. And your ultimate goal should be to try to get as much diversity back to where you were than leaving just 5 plants and calling it good. That's an office park in Beaverton. That's not a landscape.
Yeah.
It's a basic bitch garden, as we call it.
Yeah, it's not really a garden. It's just furniture.
No, it's when somebody goes to a nursery and grabs everything they can, and that's all that they're willing to get.
pretty.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of like silk floral arrangement on your dining room table, right?
But what contractors and garden designers have to do is work with the people they're making the garden for. So they understand that the health of the soil is the primary goal to begin with, instead of just neglecting the soil and then piling loam on it at the very end and
Selling all of those problem solver products down the road.
Casseron, you have casseron deserts and all sorts
Yes.
of. And casseron and those weed killers will also sterilize the soil. And the plants that are horrible weeds are adapted to sterilize soil from Eurasia.
So guess what? You're making it even more
You're
exciting
making-
for those guys to
That's
show
what
up
you're
and
doing.
set up
You're,
camp.
you're making a landscape for weeds.
So by herbiciding a garden, you're creating an environment, things that are healthy for the soil will not grow, but the things that you're trying to kill off are going to start to thrive.
Exactly.
Did you all hear that?
Remember, a plant doesn't have to be a permanent specimen either. You can use plants temporarily. One of the greatest plants to put into a new landscape is Ceanothus, not because it's just pretty and has blue flowers and it attracts tons of pollinators, but it fixes nitrogen like crazy. When you take the Ceanothus out after 8 to 10 years, you have like tomato soil.
Wow.
The best soil in the
Really?
world.
I had no idea.
That's-
Yeah.
That's why you plant Ceanothus. It's not just because it's pretty, it's because it fixes so much nitrogen.
I'm loving
Okay.
this notion as plants as tools, right? Because we sit here in a world right now where we pump up all sorts of energy to run these equipment pieces, big or little. We have our products that we're adding in all the time. So what would it look like, Paul? Thank you, because it's blowing my mind a little bit to think about just retraining ourselves to recognize, reach for a plant first to solve this problem. Reach for the Meadowfoam, reach for the Ceanothus, reach for the thing, not as if that's the end planting design of your beautiful garden.
Gardens that go through a process and they always change, just change. So you might as well go with it. And that's why I always put Ceanothus. And Ceanothus are not for people who have old gardens, really. They're people who have new gardens and they want something instant. They're fast.
Yeah.
They fix nitrogen. They get pollinators there fast, and they drop tons of leaf litter, which piles up.
And small leaf litter, which can decompose quickly, right?
Yes, and they fix nitrogen, so that's helping the mycorrhizae and things too.
I was driving home from the gorge the other day, and I stopped by the side of the road because the native Ceanothus were just amazing. I got out and I was taking pictures of the little bees around, and it was gorgeous. I picked a few little sprigs and brought them home. They're just gorgeous.
Plant, and that's the hardest to grow. It's a beautiful Ceanothus. It's my favorite one, too.
Yeah.
Those big, long panicles, light blue, covered with pollinators, and it's wonderful.
I need to go get some more Ceanothus. This is fascinating. I'm like, I need 10 more of these plants that we need to be really thinking of in terms of like succession.
There's ways you can use plants in place of herbicides, pesticides, and things like that. You can. You really can. It's very simple. You can do it in your own garden. You can just grab some seeds from somewhere, some like love and a mist if you have some, and throw it down in the weedy section. You've turned your area into the weeds you want.
The weeds you want.
We're going to tap into the weeds you want.
What's your favorite toolbox? Like 10 of your favorite plants. We've already talked about Ceanothus, talked about Meadowfoam, clover. What are these other ones that are easy to reach to do a good job
for a new garden?
That's hard because there are not very many. Any legume will fix nitrogen.
Ceanothus is a great example. Are there other temporary little shrubby things?
There are some sedges that do that. Hendersonii is a succession species that goes through. Basically what happens in the Central Oregon Coast Range is when they log it, and then what comes up first are forbs, herbs. And then what comes up after that are manzanitas and ceanothus, and they fix nitrogen. And they get overtopped by the alders, which also fix nitrogen. So you've had 2 sessions of nitrogen fixing going on in succession. And then Douglas firs come and they're shaded by the alders, so they're protected from too much drought. And they overtop the alders. Once they overtop, the alders die, but they fix the nitrogen for that section. And so you have this whole succession of soil building that goes on with succession. Unfortunately, you'll go out to the Coast Range, you'll see all these yellow Douglas fir. That's because they've cut everything down, omitted the succession, and put in seedlings.
They're little baby seedlings.
And they're all yellow because they have no nitrogen because they haven't gone through the succession extension. So cover crops, they fix the soil.
That's such a good macro scale example of what happens on these micro scale gardens as well. When you have a new planting of pick your random plant palette, put it in the ground in soil that hasn't been really very thoughtfully cared for, and you get a little visual bouquet for a moment, but they might not thrive. They might not do a whole lot. And now you got to go to the garden section and buy some solution versus something that's had that kind of robust soil built that has succession in mind already from the get-go.
I think every garden you should do succession, especially new construction, to consider it because you're talking about the second or third horizon that's been compacted. And if you have Douglas firs, it could run over the roots and cause those to be weak. There's all sorts of things that happen that you have to prepare for at a construction site. But I think retaining the soil is the most important thing you can do. Because otherwise you're just trucking it in and using more carbon to truck it in.
Yeah, which we do every day in construction. Guilty. But what I love about this conversation is just these tools in order to think about how we're building
what
it.
other plants I use those tools.
Shade. We talked about the sun version. Is there a shade version?
A shade nitrogen fixture. That's interesting. I'd have to look that up. I don't know. That's very hard because
alder?
usually there's sun. Alders are sun plants. They eventually get over top of Douglas firs and it kills them. They fix nitrogen during that succession, so you're good. Greg and I have been talking about growing white alder, which is a longer-lived plant than red alder, and it's native to the Willamette Valley, and it fixes an immense amount of nitrogen, and it's a very good tree, too. It's a long-lived tree as opposed to red alder, which is just a short-lived tree, brittle, and can't take temperatures over 105. It weeps a red sap out of it.
Yeah, that's what Seven Oaks has been talking to us about, too, as we've been specking, is white.
Gotta go with white.
Going white, yeah.
Who's cultivating them?
Seven Oaks.
Seven Oaks
Is that our one stop?
Good job.
If you drive down I-5 through the Willamette Valley, you go by Salem and Albany. There are perpendicular creeks that go to I-5, and they're all lined with white alder. Have you seen those? The beautiful little tree. It's an umbrella-shaped tree, very lacy. It's a very nice tree, and it fixes tons of nitrogen and could be used as a succession species very easily.
Succession planting for soil health and for weed elimination.
Pollinators, for native pollinators, that's extremely important. So you're using native plants to encourage native pollinators to do the job of things that herbicides would normally do.
Can I ask you a question? As someone who knows the plants well and knows what they do well and also grows the plants to provide But I feel like sometimes it's a drop in the bucket. To use this as an industry, to use this as a changing of the language of how we take care of our land and what we plant, we need so much in production. And what's your perspective on that as a nursery owner and as
Production
someone
as in,
of materials to plant?
oh, that's a totally different subject because
Right.
that's an economic thing at this point. It's a totally different thing that's going on where that's the industry is shrinking like crazy and becoming one specific source as opposed to a whole bunch of different little nurseries which we used to have. Those are going away, and it's just a demographic thing too. Baby boomers are aging out, and the Gen X is a much smaller generation, and Gen Y, they're very concerned with doing the right thing. They're obsessed with doing the right thing to the point where it's just calm down. You'll be okay. It'll be okay.
But you have the plants for Gen Y.
We have the vents
You
for
like
Gen
to
Y. They like natives and they do their research. They're very good at doing their research. That's why we have a website that has all that
I
information.
love your website.
know.
Well, thanks.
Oh
I
my
tried
goodness.
to jam as much in there as I could so we don't
It's
have to answer
invaluable.
questions.
It is, and I love how playful it is too.
And if you noticed, I put the hardy annual seedlings, their midwinter seedling appearance is a picture of it on each description so you can tell what the seedling looks like so you don't weed it out.
That's good. Oh, I didn't know that. I'm going to
Yeah.
find that.
I'm thinking back to those early journalism instincts, but like you brought it over to create a website of all of our plant love.
The website was fun. I mean, it was very easy to do. It didn't take long at all. It only took 2 months.
On behalf of all of us that log in frequently to
Oh, thanks.
check the directory, thank you.
I don't see any of the statistics at all anymore. I don't even look.
It's a tool for our team.
Oh, that's nice.
Julie's nodding over there because
Oh,
she
that
uses
makes me
it as
feel
a
better.
resource to
Good.
know what to choose. Like you are our Bible.
Oh,
you are,
good.
Yeah, I'm not joking.
I was an editor of the Western Garden Book, so I know how to do that.
That's another thing to add to the list of Paul's accomplishments. It's impressive. I see that you care more than anything with everything that you put
I
time.
have to care about the plants because things are going away. It was very upsetting to me when, after 45 years, we grew up in the country. I had great wildflowers, insanely good wildflowers, you guys, like dodecathians and lithophragma, these are prairie stars, fritillarias, 2 species that were endemic only to that property.
Really?
A red-flowered cicerentium.
This is outside of Eugene.
Yeah, a red-flowered cicerentium. It's red flowers with gray leaves. It's a beautiful blue-eyed grass, and it's just gone now. And the other one was Lomatia Bradshire, which is a biscuit root that we found on the property. But that's all gone now. The invasive weeds, that geranium lucidum, I think it is,
Sorry.
wiped out all the erythroniums. It's wiped out all the fawn lilies. It's wiped out all the nemophila. The baby blue eyes are all gone down there of that one weed. If you could find a weed that was more impressive than that one, you could set it loose.
There's one scenario that we come across a lot in landscape that I just want to ask your expertise at. So I have it here at my house. We just had it at the vineyard that we worked at, but we end up in these Doug fir forests or cedar forests, these dense forests, and then you end up with a bunch of blackberries, a bunch of herb Robert. The list goes on. But I'm thinking of Meadowfoam and some of the things we've talked about. I'm like, okay, those don't necessarily apply because it's too shady. What do we do there?
There's a perennial vine that people have not used at all in Western Oregon, and the Pacific Northwest is very low on native vines, very few native vines. But one of them is a ground cover, and it's called clinopodium. It used to be called Saturia or yerba buena, which means the good herb. It's a mint family relative. It's an evergreen ground cover that grows in dry shade.
Okay.
And it will outcompete things if you give it a little bit of water.
Okay.
It'll take over.
Okay.
It grows with Vancouveria and sword ferns under Douglas fir forests. And I've seen it go the distance with other weeds.
What's the cheat sheet? Where do we find it?
You grow it. I think I
We
bought
grow,
it
yeah,
from you.
Clinopodium Douglasii, which used to be Saturia Douglas.
Do you grow it in quantity?
We grow so much of it, and it sells immediately because people figure out that it's a very good ground cover
know.
for shade
I'm like-
that will kill.
I'm ordering 4 flats.
You can start yourself too. Just put a rock on a stem as it's growing along, and it'll root.
It's just to hold it against the
Yeah,
soil so
layered
it'll
soil.
send it.
Just put a rock on the root and move it around. That's what I do.
I've got like an acre and a half of this.
I'm
palm
sure
start
it's
a sec-
it was native here before this house. I'm sure. I'm positive. And it
It's out
smells
there.
like mint, and we used to put it in iced tea. It's very nice. It has little tiny white mint flowers that you barely even see, but pollinators love it. And it has round leaves that turn red in the winter, and they come back to green in the summer.
So in terms of succession, do we let that go in and outcompete the blackberry and the Robert?
You'd have to fertilize that because of the shade, but yes, I would put that in there to outcompete. And also sword ferns work well, work great for that. Lady ferns work well, but you have to water a lot. Myanthemum, stellatum, and dilatatum would work.
What's
well.
that?
Myanthemum dilatatum is a really invasive perennial from the Oregon coast. It looks like a lily of the valley, and it's leaf to leaf. You've seen it before. I'm sure you know that plant if you're from Oregon. It's leaf to leaf. It's like you plant that and you have to run away. But it'll take everything else out.
Okay. So I just need to go get some of these because I'm spending my weekends, weekend after weekend, pulling because I will not spray because there's salamander,
pulling
quail.
is bad because you're going to destroy the mycorrhizal threads that are in the soil. California now, instead of pulling plants around that are invasive, around native plants that are endangered, they use Roundup. Yes, they use Roundup on the actual leaves because they don't want to destroy the milk mycelia that'll kill the orchid
This is
when
where
you
I'm
pull.
so stuck because I know folks here that do it too, that recommend you just are very strategic and you go and use
I'm
Roundup
very
on the
strategic with it.
The purist in me struggles so much with this. So I really want
Yeah.
to hear you say more.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm
put
like-
it in this perspective. One battery is 1,000 times worse. Getting rid of one battery in the garbage is 1,000 times worse than one bottle of Roundup. Now, Roundup is not good, and I would not use it in mass. It's stupid to be used in mass. The way they've relied on it is absolutely ridiculous and stupid, and it's probably toxic because, of course, it's toxic. But mostly, it's only useful in places like cracks between pavers or in sidewalks and things like that. I can endorse the use of it for that. If you can't find boiling water, which works just as well.
What about just going and weed whacking before things go to
That's
seed?
great. In fact, what I used to do on our property in Eugene behind the house is I would wait until June 1st and then I would run the lawnmower and it would scatter the wildflower seeds all over the place. And it also got rid of most of the understory. It was almost like a low intensity burn.
Right,
Oh,
yeah,
cool.
without flame, but you've
Without
gone and
flame.
scorched
Can
it
take-
otherwise.
Exactly. And
Okay.
it throws the seed all over the place. And it worked well.
So say more about taking things out by the roots, destroying the mycorrhizae. I'm trying to grapple for
It's
this.
hard-
I'm
it's
trying to
hard.
grapple with all these different...
Very complex. And if you're in a flower bed that's established, don't pull. Let it stay established. Don't pull.
Really? Even the thistle that are coming up in my beautiful perennial bed?
Thistles are interesting. The way thistles work is that they have a long root system that goes way down. Thistles is a cereal species. It's a colonizing species. What happens is that it pulls up calcium from the subsoil, but Circium need acid soil to live. They kill themselves by pulling the chalk up from the subsurface, and they eliminate themselves. And that's the part of the succession.
So let them grow, cut off their heads so they don't seed more?
Yeah.
Okay.
But pulling is a really sticky wicket, too. You have to be very careful. I try not to pull. Once I get into a situation where I don't have to pull anymore, I don't.
Okay, so pulling is a necessary part of the process, but not as a...
Not as a permanent solution. You can use other things for solutions for that.
Okay, especially when you're going into mass restoration.
Yeah, because people are trying to grow things like castanheas or what are those called? Indian paintbrush? And those are parasitic. And there are a lot of plants that turn out to be semi-parasitic. When you break that mycorrhizal thing, it'll just kill it. You have a plant over here, just go.
Because that underground connection
Yeah,
has
that
been
underground
severed,
connection.
and
If
now...
you dig down, you can find it. They're little black threads that
Yeah.
go along. You can see them.
But that's interesting to say. So if you're out here just willy-nilly pulling things, you're actually causing a downstream effect on some other living organism
You could
that's
be,
been
yeah.
relying on...
You very well could be.
Yeah.
You could be wiping out something
Interesting.
down the road.
You know me, I'm already zooming out to all of my analogies for the world we live in. I'm like all the care we need to take because the impacts we make in places have results in other spots. We need to be respectful of life.
I think the most important thing is that we shouldn't be driving carbon around all over the place. That seems to be a huge waste for climate change. That seems to be a really bad thing. Just moving things around is just a lot of carbon.
It's interesting because it's like the busy work that we tell ourselves is productivity. But what I'm hearing is this, we're relying on more stillness, less
Yeah.
pulling, less removing, less changing, and more thoughtful working with what nature wants to do as it's cycling through.
They use it for what it's for. It's worked for me. It's worked very usefully. And I don't use herbicides and I don't really pull much and I've never amended the soil. I just dig it and plant there. And if I need the plant to increase vigor, I add a little bit of organic fertilizer to the surface. And that's all I've ever really needed to do. And I remember when I first did my garden, I had a garden tour and they came through and they're like, why don't you amend the soil? Why don't you amend the soil? And I said, because things grow so fast here. They grow so fast here. You wait 10 years. And people came back 10 years later and they're like, whoa. Because things grow really fast if you water them. Water during the dry season,
Yeah.
you can get stuff to grow. And so I don't amend because you end up with just a nightmare of too much organic material, just a bushy jungle of hell. That means nothing to anybody and isn't really a garden. It's not something someone can experience. It's just sitting there photosynthesizing.
You were talking earlier about mulch and dropping things on site to let them decompose, your branches, your
Yeah.
twigs, your leaf litter.
Yeah, just chop it up and let it decompose. The most obscene thing I've ever saw in my entire life, I'll never forget this, when I moved to the city from the country, is people were putting their fall leaves in plastic bags and throwing them away, which was the most insane thing I'd ever seen in my entire life. I still can't get over it. It's so bizarre. Yeah. It is a really strange thing to do. That's your soil.
Right.
You're carting your soil away. What are you doing?
You're literally removing
You're moving your soil.
an active ingredient in a successful recipe. You're taking it out.
Taking one away. I could believe that because that's the stupidest thing. And then they're not going to decompose because they're surrounded by plastic. It's insanity. And so that was the kind of thing that I really butted up against. Wow, that's an interesting way to do things.
I get you. And I also am curious about the moment when people have some really, like Irvington, for instance, some really large maple trees and they have so much material and their soils are already starting to bury their fence lines.
What they do in the neighborhood around our shop, which I've noticed, is they all have these little chipper shredders and they because they don't have to drive it away. I've noticed them doing it a lot.
In the streets?
No, they're doing it right in people's front yards. Oh. Because they don't want to cart that stuff away. They don't want to make another trip to the thing. And I talked to this guy and he said, oh no, do it right here, do it right here.
Great.
So chipping and then leaving it on site, but now it's chipped, it's smaller, it's easier
mulch,
to just let it be.
It just becomes mulch.
Love that. And I feel like for some of our clients that think a garden needs to look like a sterile environment, meaning it's perfectly
Prim and
mulched.
proper.
Yeah. A lot of times what we'll do is we don't go for, and tell me if we're wrong, but we won't go to do their leaf cleanup until November, like maybe twice.
There shouldn't be much leaf cleanup anyway. They should be used as mulch for beds and things like that.
So what we do is we'll go and wait until everything's fallen and help them get everything raked into the right spots, and then go and do a layer of mulch on top of it, just so it looks tidy for the winter.
That sounds fun.
Okay, cool.
It's
It's a nice little lasagna of things that will break down.
Great way to do it.
Okay, great. I'm willing to change.
Well,
Love that. We can keep that one.
Just thinking we don't need to move carbon as much as we do. If there's other ways you can keep it on site. Because you can use things that you already have there. And I don't think people do that as much. I think they have to buy everything in.
Yeah, I commonly joke with our guys, especially new guys, landscaping is moving one thing from one place to another and then moving another thing back to the place you just moved stuff
And
from.
that all uses carbon.
Yeah, it does.
It just uses carbon, and it's not a good thing.
I understand that sometimes we need to level things to create patios and outdoor living spaces.
Yeah, exactly. There's things that have to happen. That's separate. But just bringing in a load of mulch every year, truck, and dumping it, and then spreading it all over your yard, all the gasoline that it costs to move that crap, to chop it up to begin with, make it into mulch,
Yeah.
and then move it, you're down the hill.
So that starts to beg the reality that when you're starting to see mulch, that means you need more plants.
Okay, so the worst thing you can have in a downtown business core in a CBD is empty lots. They're just losing money. The worst thing you can have in a garden in Oregon is bare ground, because the weeds will always find it. And that weed cloth stuff, which is going away, by the way, because the insurance companies have found out. Insurance companies found out, and people $1,300 to remove 1,000 square feet. We saw, because insurance companies won't. If you hurt your back doing it now because it's so bad for your back, they won't insure you.
Say more. So if you're interacting
So the way it was explained to me is there used to be garbage cans in the ground in Portland,
Yes, I've seen some of these.
and they wrecked so many people's backs that insurance companies snuffed it out and wouldn't let them do it anymore. That's why all the cans are above ground.
Yes,
It's going to be the same thing with weed, because to pull it up, there's so much soil on top.
That
it
is
causes
wild.
so many back problems for people that the insurance companies have gone, oh, no, we're not covering that.
Hey,
because
whatever
it's
it takes to
interesting.
have people stop using it.
Yes, exactly. And I thought that
right.
was very interesting.
Yes.
But the worst you can have in Oregon, that was bare ground. You want to cover the ground with everything you possibly can cover, because it will be things you do not
So I
want.
feel like I'm such a gluttonous planting designer. From day one, it's
No,
like,
they
no,
should
we're
touch
putting
it.
stuff in.
It's
Like,
got to touch like the wild.
we don't want to see lollipops all around. We want to see a bed of green.
You have a weed ghetto.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
just make a weed ghetto. That's not good.
How long are we willing to let, because things take time to grow in, right? How long should we be letting our clients have before we start pocket planting more in?
Pocket planting, there's also cover cropping, there's also planting for succession. Things are going to last a certain amount of
Right.
time. Archistaphylus only live 15 to 30 years. The less water they get, the longer they live. The less care they get, the longer they live. But people are amending the soil and they're fertilizing these things. I don't know why, because they're adapted to sterile soil. And their lifespan is shortening like crazy. And also it makes them less hardy to cold. All these things happen when you amend the soil that you don't want to happen to native plants. I would never amend the soil for native plants, ever. Never.
Not even
ever.
throw some fertilizer in there? with
Fertilizer,
some
yes,
microized?
I would do fertilizer, but
Okay.
I do not amendments.
No compost.
No.
Really? Not even the 2 inches on top? Oh,
No,
okay.
rot them. A Dadolinia and all that stuff that'll rot it.
Noted.
Yeah. And
Okay.
they're expensive.
Okay, so a lot of our scenarios when we are planting and designing planting plans is we have a lot of natives mixed in with a lot of non-natives that want.
You have the natives
mature.
mixed in that work with other plants. You're probably not going to find a lot of the natives because they don't work with other plants, because we have a winter wet, summer dry climate, which means we have a dry summer. Our growing season is only February to June. It doesn't go until October. It stops. The soil goes dormant. The rain stops. High pressure comes up from the southwest United States and blocks the Gulf Stream, the jet stream, and moves it up into Alaska. And we have 3 months of basically no rain. I've lived here for 45 years, my whole life. I've never seen a wet summer. There never will be a wet summer. It's just something that happens here. And we still garden like it's New England, which is really
Yes.
weird. We garden like this is a summer rainfall climate. Oh, and we'll just add water. Why? They figured out in the desert that was a bad idea. And we're like a desert here for 3 months. We just have a lot of growing season and trees and things, and we have lower overnight low temperatures, which makes the water stress much less likely here because we have lows in the 50s and 60s at night as opposed to the 70s, 80s like in the south. But we have to start gardening with the climate instead of against the climate because that's what people are doing now. They're just doing this landscape will fit all places in the Northwest kind of thing. And every little biome is different. You kind of have to be in touch with the biome of what was there to begin with because you do want to replace some of the diversity that you've lost. We call it the landscape architect's war on diversity because that's what it is. It's just they'll take away everything and then just add 4 more plants. And you'll be like,
Not going to work.
not going to work. That's a desert. We've just made a desert.
So how do we deal with clients when they I want the camellias from the East Coast, and I want my rose
Well,
garden, I
camellias
want
are great,
my
but they're not
foxgloves.
on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so there is, even zonally, how we plan irrigation. We have a native zone. We're not amending that soil. We're letting that be native. We're having this perennial zone. That's all of your things that you want, flower, and that gets compost. Are we starting to think about soil
Different zones completely.
for soil construction?
Yes, for soil construction and just for different irrigation zones. There are different soil zones in my garden. I mean, the soil's different in one place than it is in another place. It
That's
just
cool.
is.
And as a
Handle
landscape
it differently.
contractor, we plan it. Everything gets 2 to 3 inches of compost.
Yeah, and that's great. That's a luxury. That's a great luxury you're giving people.
Should I do that for native plants or stop doing that
No,
in native
no,
zones?
don't need native plants.
Don't do it in
Add
native.
fertilizer to native plants, but I wouldn't add any
Okay.
organic matter.
So now I'm taking away the compost from native plants.
So I'm curious, what is the visual tidiness that you're leaving a client with in a native installation when the
Well,
dust
native
settles?
is-
What does that look like for them?
That's interesting because there's a native garden around the block from me, and every single thing is legit native and relatively close to Portland. So I was very impressed. It looks like crap. Because to me, I look at it and go, wow, that's interesting. There's something from the top of Mount Hood is now something near the Oregon coast, which is something from the desert, which is something from the coast range, all jammed together in one yard. So it makes no sense to me. And it looks horrible to homeowners, unfortunately. It just does. They just can't deal with it. I wish we could change that aesthetic. I wish we could change that meme and that paradigm. That would be the first thing I would change is people just calm down. Everything is not your bedroom. You don't have to clean everything outside. You can just let things be a little bit. And back to the putting leaves in garbage bags.
Yeah, just let
Just
it be
leave
there.
it there. It's your soil. It's what makes your soil. The tree made leaves out of your soil, and I was putting the leaves that made your soil back into the ground. That's just how it works. Carting things away is just bizarre.
Say we've designed a garden that's going to be installed with an appropriate palette of natives or a
Yes.
thoughtful way to make this collection look good. And then we've hired a wonderful company to come out and install this thing, but we're not putting mulch. This is just like a very pragmatic question. If we're not putting mulch on top of this native zone at all, in many ways, the mulch is like the frosting on the cake that helps everyone
Yeah, I would put
feel
bark
like...
mulch.
Not bark dust, but
Bark mulch.
chips.
Okay.
Okay.
Little shredded bark.
So you're not doing the 2 or 3 inches of compost that's really going to like
No, but-
overnourish the soil.
But
the
mulch
bark-
everything with something. You have to mulch everything with something, and I use bark. I spot mulch right
Yes.
in the individual plants. I don't mulch the entire thing.
that becomes the cleanly last...
The ordered.
There's that messy ecosystems, orderly frames concept, right? Like you have to
Yes.
show there's a cue to care. Someone cares about this.
Yes.
And we've done something, and then it can grow and be its wild self.
And it'll work out better. You'll end up with a better result than you would end up with just a completely manicured, over chemical. Treating a garden like a bedroom is not good. And you're wasting a ton of money on chemical. You're poisoning the atmosphere. You're poisoning pollinators. You're encouraging invasive plants. And there's a whole bunch of things that are happening because you're trying to solve these problems to make it look like a bedroom.
I found some success in the last couple of years working with clients and trying to help tease out these zones like we were talking about where, okay, we have an appetite for the crisp, tidy garden. Open the garden magazine and see the beautiful beds. So you might have that appetite. If there's enough space to experiment, I can convince folks to say, let's do those gardens right here and closest to your patio. And then let's take this back half of your property and have this zone change. And this is the place where we're going to bring in natives and interesting
There
things.
is
And
really
now-
good news. And the good news is that Gen Y and the people younger than me want a much more wild aesthetic.
Absolutely.
They'll take one look at something and they'll go, no, that's too formal.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not
Yeah.
me. They want wild crap that goes flying out. They want it to look
My
wild.
favorite
That's
now.
fantastic.
My favorite
That is
client right
great.
now is for a family where they've got youngish family and young kids, and they're ripping out their Portland front yard, and we're doing all sorts of incredible natives and children's nature play, and it's
all
it's
sorts of
so
things
much
you can
fun,
do.
and
Yes,
they
so-
love it, and they want it. There's no convincing.
And
That's
that
what
whole
they want.
generation is like that. They
Yeah.
do not like
It's
manicured
great.
aesthetics. That is not what they want. They do not want the 1960s and 1970s anymore.
When I think about also like how to approach some of our older clients, the people who have the luxury to work with,
A lot of those people were trained on chemicals.
they were. It makes me think about traveling to some of these really great Italian gardens, like the Medici gardens. And there is, even when you look at these great gardens or some of the great English gardens, there's an edge. So I think
Yes.
even talking about that edge.
Exactly.
Like in the garden, there is the formal garden that's within a hedge, some clean line, and then there's the edge where it becomes the wild.
Which is what I think is really important when we sell a lot of native grasses to people. And one of the most important things I have to say on the tag and say to people is that you cannot plant these will reseed. They're meant to reseed. They're from here. You have to keep these away from highly manicured areas.
Yes.
Do not put native grasses near highly manicured areas if that is the aesthetic you want to maintain. That's why you have to do, separate the two. You separate flower beds, plants.
There's a lot to glean here. We've started with cover cropping. We've gone into how to prepare past invasives and prepare your landscape for succession planting. We've talked about now this formality and what's acceptable and what's not and where we're going. We've talked about soil and climate. This is pretty loaded.
I want to ask a question going back to your paleoclimatology degree and your backwards looking perspective on the history of this place. If you could take that knowledge and how we've assessed what's happened before and then jump into the future and come back and talk about studying this era right now of what's going on, how would you define this era of what's changing?
So let's talk about it on the macro level.
Yeah, exactly.
And so the macro level is that we're going back into another ice age. And 6,000 years ago, we peaked in the interstadial, the time between ice ages. And it was at the same temperature that we just currently surpassed, was how high the temperature got 6,000 years ago. What that means is that Eugene had the same climate as Grants Pass. Portland had the same climate and text assemblage as Roseburg. And Seattle had the same text assemblage and climate as Portland. And now we've gone back to that. Seattle now has Portland's climate from the 20th century, and we have Medford's climate. It's all shifting and shifting. So it's all a process of, none of the things is going to be static. So it's very hard to answer some. You're just like, we don't know, because in the year 2000, we averaged 12 days above 90. Right now, we average 28. That's a big difference.
Big.
That usually takes several thousand years to achieve that much change in temperature.
We're not imagining it. It's been a wild ride these last few decades.
It's been a horribly wild ride. And when you look at the past, in the past, when we were warmer than we were today, we were drier. We had a longer summer drought, and we were drier. And it seems to me, as far as I can tell, climate change is mimicking our interstadial. And the reason the interstadial was so warm is because just serendipitously, perihelion happened to happen when the Earth was closest to the sun, happened to happen in the summertime. It increased solar insolation and made that one interstadial warmer. We can use that interstadial as a reference to what we can expect in the future.
Fascinating.
That makes sense?
It does, but what does that tell us about what we're doing other than we're moving too much carbon around the landscape? And what do we do?
You start talking about invasives, you start talking about exotics. There are certain exotics we probably shouldn't grow here, and there are some that we should grow here, and for different uses and purposes. I think that people just can't think of gardening as a static thing. When you lock it into a static bedroom and everything's going to look static and the same all the time, that's when you go wrong. Things go wrong because you're trying to maintain something that you're battling against.
So getting our clients' expectations and our expectations that a garden is not tile, set it and forget it.
And I would always say to them, it doesn't rain here in the summer. And there's a certain amount of the population doesn't know that just isn't in their purview. It's just not something they ever think about. Because you talk about irrigation all the time. And what if you could do something without irrigation and you just worked with the climate? You could use Vaccinium ovatum as like a boxwood hedge and trim it and shear it.
And it's so pretty.
It's so pretty. And it's a way better. It's got edible berries and plant. Why didn't they use that as boxwood? Why did we bring boxwood here? Why do we need boxwood? I may have boxwood in my garden, but I wish it had been Vaccinium ovatum or salal hedges and things like that. Why didn't we do that? It doesn't make sense. We bought an English holly, and that was a nightmare.
Or Pacific waxwordle instead of
Pacific
laurel.
waxwort, Gary elliptica, all these
my gosh.
evergreens that make great hedges. Even Douglas fir makes a great shared hedge that's like this tall. And you can maintain that for 100 years.
Instead of the Leland cypress that I
Instead of
planted in my yard.
Leland cypress, nightmare.
I know. I gotta rip it out.
They have groups in England, support groups for people who have Leland cypress hedges around them.
Support groups.
They do. Look it up. It's serious.
Amazing.
Because it just blacks out the whole yard and you're doom, gloom.
It doesn't have to be this way. A better world is possible.
But that's native, so it's okay. Because that's half Monterey cypress and half Alaska cedar.
Okay, noted. Luckily, I'm married to an arborist, so he'll make sure it's maintained in the right size.
They all crush apart in the ice and snow.
Okay, great. We'll pull it out. Put some coyote brush in its place.
Baccharis makes a great hedge if you water it and shear it. Makes a great boxwood-looking green hedge, too.
Yeah, it's my alt boxwood.
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's great for that. And I don't know why people didn't use it to begin with. It's not very long-lived, but still.
Even just that knowledge right now, that Gary elliptica, Pacific wax myrtle, evergreen huckleberry, coyote bush, those are your hedge options, people, in the Pacific Northwest. Stop
should
with the
be,
boxwoods.
Once again, I'm just like, more production, please. We need more of these around.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of size that
Of
can go
size.
into gardens.
Unfortunately, in nurseries, they tend to put all the native plants in a little ghetto,
Yeah, here's your like one table.
and they're not raised really well. We try to mix them in also with the well-raised exotic stuff so that they have the same stature.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
So people will think of that. They won't even think. They'll just pick it up. It'll be native. They won't even know.
This is just another respectable, beautiful plant. Get it in the ground.
Yeah.
The size, though, makes me want to go and start a nursery. Don't worry, I'm not going to.
And the bigger the plants are, the harder it is.
I know, this is a
More
really
expensive.
bad idea.
Can we collectively resource the right
Yeah.
folks to do it, though? Because
You have to make money, and it's very hard to make money, unfortunately. And everyone's obsessed with the echinacea mania, like tulip mania. They're just putting out more echinaceas every year, and that's all they're doing. They're not going for native plants and nativars, or whatever that's called.
What is that?
It's for people who don't understand the difference between native and exotic, and so they try to put a label on it to understand that there could be a named form of a native plant. It's a mental organization thing, as far as I can tell, because it really means nothing. But people say the word nativar because they want to somehow separate it out from.
I've never heard of that word.
You haven't?
So something that is it like a mixed garden?
No,
Yeah,
it's
some
a
names?
named cultivar of a species.
Named
Just like what
cultivar of
happens when you
species.
make any species. I found this delphinium and it was purple instead of blue. I'm naming it purple pound or whatever.
Oh, I see
And
what
that's
you're
a
saying.
nativar.
Okay, got it.
It's very ambiguous.
So it's just putting a name on something like Savi Snow aster.
Yeah, that'd be a nativar
Okay, which is a great plant.
for use for getting rid of other things. And
Yeah, it's getting rid of
crowding
everything in
stuff
my
out.
garden now.
Yeah, I just prefer the idea of working with what you have on site rather than dragging everything in all the time, because maybe you can use more creative ways of solving problems like cover crops and boiling water to eliminate weeds and things like that. I think there are things you can do besides trucking carbon all over the place, because that's just wasting our climate. It's bad. It's not good. It's not good. Don't buy land in Florida.
And this don't pull weeds too is mind blowing to me as I was planning my afternoon to go
Watch when you
tansy for
watch
this
when you-
afternoon.
Oh, tansy's horrible. You
Yeah.
just get the caterpillar and eat them.
What?
Oh, there's the cinnabar moth. They brought in that caterpillar to eat tansy ragwort, and it's a little black and white striped worm. Our parents used to pay us to move it from plant to plant.
Oh my gosh.
integrated pest management
Yeah.
childhood.
Yeah, they used to pay us to move the little caterpillars from one tansy to another.
Gosh.
This is how you got started.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it screws up their animal's digestive system or something. I think it clogs up.
Yeah, for livestock.
Yeah, and things. They wanted us to get rid of it, so we would just move the cinnabar moth larva all over the place.
I'm gonna go try to see if I can find any cinnamon.
It's a striped black and orange striped.
I don't think I've seen any of these around here.
They usually will swarm one whole plant, and then they'll go to the next plant and swarm the whole plant.
Okay.
And they go to the next plant and swarm the whole plant. They're not just randomly everywhere.
Okay.
They do their thing.
Now I know.
Yeah.
Gosh.
The to-do list.
The to-do list. The to-do list became different. That's great to know. That was mind-blowing. I literally was going to spend my weekend pulling out Herb Robert down in the holler and tansy, and now I'm going to
Tansy, Try to
go.
find the. I'll
I'm going to
give you
find
the-
these
I'll give you
moths.
the number of the
Okay,
place.
and I'm going to go weed whack, even though I'm probably going to be moving seeds around at this point in the season. Then I'm going to change my practices about how I plan soils and different plant ecologies, and then in relation to irrigation
And do it really in simple increments.
Yeah. Don't do it all. Don't bite it all off and
Yeah,
flounder.
it's like we're doing a whole garden all at once. It's
You
not
obviously
bad. You do
don't
it
know
in
who I
increments.
am.
And that would, well, I'm all or nothing too, but it's
Yeah.
easier for people to do it in increments, to
Yeah.
attack it in increments rather than trying to be the whole thing at once.
I understand. Wow.
Paul, this is so much fun. Thank you.
Oh, I think it was fun. Thanks. I appreciate it.
I really feel like there's just so many great nuggets in here that this might be one that I come back and listen to a handful of times just to really grasp it all and really take home. There's so many to-dos that are really important in terms of changing the practice.
Take 2 or 3 and put them into practice and start that way. And you just keep putting compost on and doing what you did before if it was working. But there are other things that work too.
I've got to get the Meadowfoam, the Ceanothus going, and then this native vine. I'm already going to forget how to pronounce it, but I'll have to come and hunt it out.
Saturia is yerba buena,
Yerba
Yes.
buena.
the good
Yes.
herb.
Yes.
good herb.
I'm excited.
It's cool. It's native from Alaska down to Northern California in the redwoods. It's a very nice plant.
I'm coming to your nursery today. Gonna find me some yerba buena. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
It's been a dream.